Well, welcome to HR Doctors. My name is Brent. I'm the owner of the Vancouver Express Employment Professionals Office. We're a staffing recruitment company, and we work with businesses and job seekers in the Vancouver market. And over the last number of years, especially through COVID, we have identified that there is definitely a disconnect between the businesses looking to hire, the job seekers looking for jobs. Years ago, we came up with our core values, which are HR Doctors: helpful, resourceful, driven, relentless, and sensible. And we use these tools to help us understand how, as an internal team, we're going to better serve the people that we work with. And in doing such, we started producing content to help job seekers and help businesses hire. And through doing that, we started connecting with HR professionals and trying to bridge the gap between the job seekers and businesses by sharing information that we see on our sides of the table to just help people better understand what they can either do better, identify blind spots, whatever it may be. Today, we're joined by Kathy Enros, who brings more than 20 years of global human resource experience in software, consulting, alcohol, beverage, and the retail space. She's a strong focus on scaling high-growth companies and building healthy corporate culture. Kathy has in-depth experience creating HR programs that enable colleagues to be amazing at what they do. Her specialties include training, compensation, benefit programs, employee communication, performance management. Kathy believes that the heart of a great company is its employees, and she's built in-house recruitment and employer branding engines to ensure that only superstars are sought out. Kathy has significant experience in building companies organically through rapid global expansion plans within Canada, the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Australia, and Hong Kong, and Singapore. Kathy, thanks so much for joining me today. I really look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today.
Thank you for that intro, and I'm super excited to share my experience, and hopefully it will help others out. So yeah, happy to share.
Awesome. Well, one of the things we talked about in some of our recent conversations is about why HR should have a seat at the table and why HR shouldn't have to fight for that seat at the table. Why should HR be at the table?
Gosh, this is like one of the things that I'm just so passionate about. It's a good question to start off on. And it's something, like you said, I feel like no company should ever have to, or no HR person should ever have to fight for that. When you think about it, every organization, doesn't matter what your industry is, it's based on and is successful based on people. Without any people, doesn't matter what industry you're in, you don't have a company. So if you don't focus on the individuals and making them do whatever you can to make them successful, which in turn, makes your organization successful, whether that's through, happy customers, increased revenues, you name it. If you don't have that focus and that deep care, you're not, the people aren't going to be happy and your company's not going to be successful. The CEO needs to care desperately about their teams, how happy they are they producing, are they engaged, are they performing, will they go over and above for you? Having the people function report to the CEO, it sends a huge message that CEO cares. They want their employees to be successful, and they know that it's going to ensure that the company in turn is successful and that the company's customers are in turn successful. It's so powerful. I could dive deep into that area, but in general terms, that's what it is. And that CEO needs an insight, like a direct line into how things are going, and should care about it deeply.
Do you feel that it's something I've noticed in the market recently, especially through COVID, that HR became much more predominant as a result of people working remote, and it kind of forced HR into people's faces in organizations where it maybe didn't have as much of a prominent role? Did you feel the same?
Yeah, 100%. COVID, terrible thing, but small benefit is that it really forced companies to look in a mirror and look inwards and say, what, are we doing what we can to support our employees through this tough time? And, you had to, otherwise you'd lose people to stress, you'd lose companies. And so, what happens is they, rely on the people experts, which are usually, the people leaders and the people team, HR. And so it really put a great spotlight, I guess, as to the power of employee engagement and what a strong team can do, I guess, to keep employees happy and healthy. Yeah.
I really see, especially internal HR, as like the heart of the business. They're like, they see what the people are feeling, like they, if the business is injured and it's bleeding, like they have to, if it's turnover or whatever it may be, like they stop the bleeding. If the business is growing, they help kind of put that strategy together of how we're going to build this monstrous team. Why do you think that it's something that HR had to fight for? Like, what do you think, if it was maybe systematic through the past, like why has it maybe been something in the past, if it's now been put into way more companies' faces, as I think we'd agree that it has been? Why do you think it maybe wasn't the case in the past?
I don't think organizations realize the power of high employee engagement, and how they could directly link it to things like revenues and company valuation. And
Mm,
now I think there's just more data points where you can. And I would say too, just to kind of build on that, it's just something you said there. HR, it is definitely the heart of the business, 100%, but it's also everyone is HR. I always tell every manager, you're HR just as much as me.
hmm.
You are going to know what's going on, or should know what's going on with your team before I do. If you're a great leader that's in tune with your team. And so, you have a great people team that's there to help sort of, make those leaders even better people
Yeah.
leaders. And so it's everyone, should be focused on their employees, and not just sort of look to the people team to solve any problems that may be going on. So I think taking that lens as to the power, to your point, of HR and how it can really positively impact revenues, innovation, customer
Yeah.
satisfaction, all of that. It's true. It does 100%.
Nice. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Uh, another topic we talked about was hiring smart. You talked about your perception or your view of culture fit versus culture add, and how you define alignment. Can you elaborate on that?
I think that culture, culture is won and lost through the recruitment process. Organizations that get culture right have their recruitment process as a key part of that. It's the gatekeeper, because culture can be ruined very quickly by one person. And so if you have a very well-defined culture, if you have a very well-defined and thorough recruitment process, so that you know what you're looking for, and I'm not talking about those years of education or experience. To me, those don't even matter, because you could have the most brilliant salesperson out there, or software developer, but if they are toxic to your culture, or they're not a good match, it will kill your culture quite quickly. So you got to get it right and build it into your recruitment process with all of the hiring managers quickly. That's a necessity. And I do like to refer it as culture add. Culture fit, while it's true, it really lends to hiring like people. Human nature is to hire those that you can relate to, that are probably similar to you,
Right.
which doesn't lead to a diverse candidate or a diverse employee pool. It doesn't lead to diversity of ideas, more innovation. And so if you call it culture add, it immediately gets you thinking of, what can that person bring to the organization that maybe isn't there yet, that will add to our culture? I always refer to culture as a quilt, in that you're going to have your common threads of that
Mm,
quilt, which are your values, your mission, how you show up. But as the company grows, the quilt is going to grow. Imagine adding a patch to that quilt, but those common threads are always going to be there. And so imagine, a beautiful quilt has many different colors and patterns, and that's because there's a great diversity into the candidates that you're bringing
sure.
on board. And so that's a good way to frame it. I like to frame
Yeah.
it that way. Yeah.
I find it's really interesting with culture. We've got our core values. It's obviously led us to where we are here. We hire to it. We performance manage to it. We solve problems if we're trying to figure out how we help, or, whether we do or don't work with somebody. It always ties back to our core values for us. And I was speaking with a gentleman the other day who was working for a client of ours, and asked about their core values in their company and the mission and vision, and asked if they had it. And he said that it was the first company he'd ever worked for where it was something that they lived every single day, and how it made his life so so much easier as a manager in it was a retail company where they have like 1,000 employees across Canada and the US. And when they're bringing new hires in, when they're getting corporate communication, everything like that culture, vision, mission was all tied into it. And he said it made his life so much easier. And I wonder, like, one of the things we talked about, you've talked about the culture ad versus fit and defining that alignment. We talked about kind of defining it internally and how it like lives in the company. Like how do you guys make sure that culture is not just an idea or a poster on the wall, but that it's actually like real?
Yeah, it's a great question. It does, to your example, it has to show up everywhere. And when I say show up, there's a lot of areas where it has to show up. So it starts with the leadership team. They have to talk the talk. It's not just words on walls. Sometimes it kills me when I see, values posted on walls. It's fine, but you got to live it. And so the leadership team needs to actually, in every action that they do, they need to be, showing up with those values in mind. And then it needs to show up in practices. How are you rewarding people? And it should match, again, according to values. If someone's doing a great job and they're living those values, then reward them for that. And so there's definitely people programs that you can put into place that will reinforce that. And I think too, what I love to do, and this is so simple, is just call it out, both when someone is, exhibiting those values. Celebrate it publicly if they're comfortable doing that, but in some shape or form, celebrate it.
Yeah.
Make an example of them. Also, when someone's not, and maybe going against it, you got to empower every employee. This is not just a leadership team, because culture is, every employee's responsibility. Make sure that the employees are going to call each other out on it.
Right.
And then that will just reinforce it in every corner for sure. Yeah.
I know as a leader and a coach, it's easy when we're doing, one-on-ones, coaching, training, performance management, it's easy to tie it in. But something I feel like I've definitely failed to do is to celebrate when you recognize people that are totally bought into it and demonstrating it.
Yeah.
It's definitely a great one. What about, and we don't have to dig into to this part huge, but we did talk about how it also ties into your recruitment process. It's massive for us in our recruitment process. I mean, I behavior-based interview to my core values. I share them with people at the end of our first kind of just touch base interview and use it to literally go through each of our core competencies there. Like what have you seen or what have you done that really helped kind of build it into the recruitment process to make sure that when people were coming in that, it was a good fit for both the business and for the person coming in, and doing so with that culture ad piece in mind as opposed to fit piece in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I could talk about this forever, and I'll try and keep it high level. But what I've done is actually focused, I threw job descriptions out the window and created what I call success profiles. And it profiles what success looks like for a role. And that can be used both for recruitment, but also just for ongoing career development and performance management.
Sure.
And it, and part of that, if you were to use it for recruitment, part of that success profile would outline the values. And so you're able to evaluate it to see if there's a values match with that candidate. So that's part of the recruitment process automatically. And you're sort of setting expectations that's how you expect people to show up. And then as well, I like to hire more based on competencies and attributes, and because that is where you're going to start to see the ad. You're going to see if they have certain competencies and excel in certain areas where they can bring maybe more to the organization. We don't even look in some cases for years of experience, education, that kind of thing. We don't really care about that. There's probably basics, like, if you're a software developer, you do have to know how to code.
Sure.
But past that, we are looking for set competencies and attributes that we know make someone successful in a role. And if you focus on those aspects, you're going to have a great recruitment process. You're going to have a great, culture ad. And then one last thing on that, and just to make sure that there's alignment, is I love to create not a new hire handbook. I hate those handbooks with all the policies and rules. I like to call it a bit of a code book, and it's more explaining how, for new employees, as soon as they're hired, they get a copy of this code book, and it goes into things like traditions, how we communicate with each other, that it's okay to fail. What are our values? How do they show up? What do we expect from you? And so what a great way to set the tone before the employees even walked in the door. They
Sure.
already kind of know, how to be showing up, as I like to call it, every day, and what works for your particular company. That code book is going to be different for every organization, but it's a great way to document it. It's a nice refresher too, to kind of, self-evaluate and say, okay, well, what is that sort of code? What do the employees need to know about us, and how we, what we expect from them, and what do we look like from a culture perspective? It's a great way to sort of put it on paper.
Yeah, that's awesome. What did you call them? Success like profiles?
Success profiles. Yeah, I'm happy to do a whole other session on it, because they're quite entwined into things like career development, diversity and inclusion, recruitment process. They're really, I've had such great success just developing these. I've just developed them over the last couple of years, and there's probably still room for improvement, but I really like how it took Clue as an example,
Sure.
and really turned recruitment and career development around. And it really helped increase diversity in the candidate pool by
Sure.
focusing on success profiles. Yeah.
I'd love to dig into that further, because I have a great affliction with the traditional job post. We have a very kind of target and specific way of how we market and advertise positions, and do it very much with candidate attraction in mind, and not what we want to accomplish or what our clients want to accomplish in hiring somebody. It's really about what's in it for you. Why would you want to come here? I'd love to dig into it more. It sounds like the great premise for you for a book.
Maybe I should.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. In all honesty, I kind of took best practices that I've gleaned from other organizations, but then I Frankensteined it to what worked for me. And it's kind of cool.
I think that would be great. Another great topic. Employee engagement. We talked about an interesting view of yours on how tying employee engagement into valuation and the bottom line of a company.
Yeah. And this goes back to the very, how we started off this conversation, and just the importance of employee engagement, culture, retention, inspiration, all of that on the success of a company. And I firmly believe that you can actually tie employee engagement to revenue or to valuation. As an example, when I was at Galvanize, when I joined Galvanize, was brought in to help create a change in their culture. And they had a negative employee net promoter score when I joined. Wasn't a very healthy culture. The new CEO had brought me in to really help put some culture change through, which took, years, but we did it. We're very successful, and ended up winning a ton of awards nationally for our culture, which I'm super proud of. But looking back, we were actually able to see that as the employee engagement scores started to go up and climb from that negative to a very positive score, it was lagging, but the valuation of that company followed that same trajectory. I don't think that's coincidence at all. And I think there's a ton of companies out there that, have strong engagement and culture that in turn are successful. And it's just proof that it leads to happy employees, it leads to more innovation, it leads to higher revenues and valuation. And I mean, Galvanize just achieved, their unicorn status. And how much more proof do you need, than a unicorn status? For those who aren't in tech, that just means $1 billion valuation, which is rare.
Yeah.
That's the name unicorn. So, and Clue, where I've been most recently, same thing. It's also following those same trajectories. And the CEO firmly believes that in his words, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So,
right. Love that.
Yeah, me too.
What do you think, speaking of those two companies that you've obviously been a part of, what do you think they're doing right where, I guess first question would be, did you have to fight for a seat at those tables?
No.
Right.
And that's what they did right. Those CEOs, and it starts with them, they knew they firmly believe that that's key to a successful company. So no, I've never had to fight for a seat at the table, which is wonderful. And I think it's the first thing that has to be there. It starts with the leader.
Yeah.
It has to be there 100%. Otherwise it will fail.
Do you think there's any specific examples that would make sense to share? Obviously closer to HR than anything. I know there's obviously many things that had to go right for these companies to achieve the success that they've achieved. But obviously, we're digging into the HR stuff. Is there anything that you were able to kind of see or experience that made your life easier, like working with leadership, where they saw that, HR didn't have to fight for that seat and that you were empowered, or things that, I guess either came to you, or just any cool, like interesting stories where you said, this is something that was great that they did that, I wish everyone else would do, or that other companies should do, or.
I don't know if there's one thing, and I mean, HR is like an onion, you got to peel it back, and there's so many different things that happen from a people leadership perspective. And I think it's just, because those CEOs understand the importance of high employee engagement and strong cultures. I not only did I not have to fight for a seat at the table, but programs that I wanted to introduce that I knew were going to drive engagement, I didn't have to fight for either.
Right.
And so that makes your job pretty damn fun when you can introduce, maybe some cool employee practices, or, throw job descriptions out the window and create new success profiles because it's going to help. Like, to be able to innovate like that is so incredible. And then you can actually see employee engagement go up, and that's so rewarding, right? To be an HR professional, to be able to see your impact on an organization. It's so powerful. Yeah.
Do you think there's maybe anything, like some of the things we've talked about is like cultures that have like made or like sank companies? Do you think there's, again, it ties into just the CEOs being really bought into it, but do you think maybe in either, previous companies you've been a part of where you did have to fight, or ones that you've kind of, maybe experienced, but not directly, just things you've talked about that there's a lot that the companies were doing right? Is there things you've seen that companies have done that maybe they shouldn't do that has led to those negatives, maybe galvanized before you came in, or other examples that would make sense? Those are tough hot seat questions, but
those are really hot seat questions. Yeah, I don't want to call any company out, but I think that, it not only do the CEOs need to be bought in, they actually need to lead it. Like, they're the ones that have to be living and breathing the culture. They're setting the tone. And so it should never be something that the people leader has to kind of have to fight for. It just should be a natural thing that just always happens because the CEO is bought in and they're practicing what they preach. And so that is so key. And I think if you look at, companies that, are known for maybe poor cultures, that's where it's been in trouble. And that's where, things have gone wrong for them, is that, their bad cultures have just led to employees, could be mass exodus, or your most brilliant person in whatever function is gone now. And that could be, what if they go to your competitor? Do you want that to happen? Right. And so what are you doing to make sure that that's not going to happen, that the employees are willing to bend over backwards for your organization? It's just so powerful that, yeah.
You mentioned how the employee engagement piece and the valuation piece were so closely tied to one another, and again, just talking about how that, like, employee engagement valuation, how that can really impact the bottom line. You shared before about how having that really great culture, having that commitment from the top down, made attracting talent much easier than in previous companies. Like how, there's obviously like your recruitment strategies, but then there's also where you've got that culture there and you have the team and culture itself almost working to engage their own networks, and it's creating this funnel of people who want to work for the company, where you don't have to necessarily say, hey, come work for us, but people are saying, hey, I want to work for you, what do you have? Like, how, I guess, have you seen those things tie together?
100%. That's the dream, right? That's the dream, is you're able to externally communicate your culture so that you are attracting those folks that want to be on board with it. And every company has a different culture. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. They're just unique. Like us humans are all unique. It doesn't mean one's better, but you're trying to attract those folks that, want to be part of a startup, or maybe want to be part of a larger organization. And so how do you communicate that out there so that it's going to make your recruitment process a little bit better, in finding those folks that are excited to be there? And more often than not, people will come to a company because of the leadership team. They want to learn, and work, alongside leaders that they respect and that they can learn from. And so, again, if you've got leaders that are, living that culture and doing it in everything that they do, it's going to naturally attract people, because people love coming to organizations where they can learn from their leader and respect their leader.
Yeah.
It's also why people leave jobs too, right? And so again, it gets back to that, how important it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite calculations to share, especially with small business owners, is how, if you hire a $50,000 a year employee, in 6 months, you're $25,000 of hard cost plus CPP, EI, WCB, all that stuff. So let's say you're getting closer to 30. Then you've got your training investment that your whole business is making in that person. So you can probably double, plus your lost opportunity cost of whoever has to switch gears and focus into training.
Yeah.
And then depending on the role, anywhere from 6 months to a year sometimes. I mean, we've got some clients we work with where it's anywhere from a year to 18 months to even 24 months before the person is truly capable at being autonomous in their role, being able to provide a return to the company. A little bit easier of a pill to swallow when you're talking about like a revenue producing role like sales, much harder when you're talking about a like cost center viewed role, operations, HR, accounting, whatever it may be. Like that cost of turnover is such a killer for businesses, and sometimes we don't see like that hard cost. Have you felt that you've had to tie it in to, I mean, again, it sounds like the CEOs have been really bought in, but has that been a kind of conversation in the past, or maybe at other companies, where you've really got to tie in like, cost of turnover is going to kill us way more than the cost of a hire. Let's pay more for this person, or let's be creative. Like how, I guess how's that kind of looked in your roles?
Yeah. And again, you're right. I've worked for companies where I haven't had to sell that. However, it's a conversation I have a lot of times with new leaders, right? If they're recruiting for the first time, it's, don't be desperate when you're recruiting. Here's, what good looks like, and here's the cost of getting it wrong. And to your point, if you were to get a sales hire wrong, it will take a good 1.5 to 2 years to get back to where you need them to be, both with respect to revenues lost and the cost of retraining, rehiring, and the ramp of any salesperson can easily be 6 months to a year before they're even starting to sell and be productive. And so, like, that's a really easy argument when you show it on paper. It's like, okay, if that salesperson you just invested 6 months in is now you've had to let go because you didn't take the time to make sure that they were a great culture ad or a great, salesperson for your company, then now that 6 months gone and now you've let them go, you've got to recruit again. And especially in this day and age, recruitment's hard. It could take another 3 months there. So now you're 9 months in, and then another year of training before they're actually selling revenues. That's 2 years of revenues gone.
Yeah.
Easy argument to kind of, put things into perspective of how important it is that you get it right.
Yeah. And like you said, it all comes down to having a really good understanding on the front end, so you know what a good hire looks like, and then not compromising, going, we've got this vacancy and it's hurting us. We need to fill, we've got a reactive situation on our hands, and just going, okay, we'll plug the hole in the dam. And then you end up doing the old, one finger here, another finger there, another one here. And eventually you've never solved the problem. You just, band-aided it.
Yeah. 2 years of revenue lost versus taking another month to find that right hire. Totally different. Yeah.
One of the interesting things I was hoping you could share some insight into is, there's small businesses obviously all over the place in Vancouver. There's medium size, there's big businesses. You've obviously been a part of HR teams where you're the HR team of one. You've been a part of HR teams of 7, 8 somewhere in that range, just
Yeah.
around the 10 mark.
Yeah.
Like, when I know from a size perspective, somewhere around like the 50 employee mark is when you traditionally like bring that first, HR person in. But really where I like to dig into this is like, I think lots of people have different understandings of what HR is. HR can be talent acquisition, it can be culture, it can be people, it can be benefits, it can be all these different things. Like in the teams that you've built, can you maybe give some like perspective or context into like when you've added people and maybe how you've chosen where their specialties would be, and how you've maybe compartmentalized HR, and of course, like whether you've got a big team or a small team and you've got the ability to have 7 people in 7 different roles or just one person, like maybe where those like really critical pieces have been, and yeah, just anything on that kind of whether you're bringing first HR in or scaling to a team of 7 or 10 or whatever it may be, how you kind of look at that.
Yeah, it really depends on the company and their growth plans,
Sure.
to be honest. So it can vary quite a bit. Now, I tend to work, I love organizations that are in super small and then super hyper growth mode.
Right.
And so, a good rule of thumb is at least one HR person per 50 employees when you're in hyper growth. If you're kind of flat and in maintenance mode, it might be more like one per 75 employees. And it really will vary as to who you bring along, because you kind of need everything from, strategic, what I like to call HR business partners who can partner with the leaders of each area of business to help them get more out of the employees and help them grow their employee base when it comes to skill set and motivation and all that sort of thing. So they're advising strategically on that organizational structure, compensation areas that are going to help them, keep them motivated, that sort of thing. If you're in hyper growth, you're definitely going to need folks that are going to specialize in talent acquisition. That's like a must have. And probably pretty key and critical is to invest a lot if you're expecting high growth. And by high growth, I'm usually dealing with doubling to tripling in size within a year. And so talent acquisition is very, very key. And then you just usually need some folks too to help, in the background with systems. The more you can have efficient systems in place, it lets the other HR business partners be better strategic partners within the organization versus I hate paperwork and policies, and I'm not that kind of HR. And I'd rather be like literally in the business, helping the leaders be incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I've tried to help some of the small businesses we work with where they're looking to bring in their first HR person. And I found often that they want the person who's going to be able to help with the back end systems and the processes, the policy, the engagement. They really want it all. And of course, that makes sense when you're bringing in your first person. You really kind of do need a jack of all trades. But I find often talent acquisition gets tied into like the one quantifiable measurable, right? It's something you can see, you helped me hire 10 people or you didn't.
Yeah.
Whereas like, how do I know if my like team feels better or doesn't feel better? How do I know if the culture piece is working? Like do you feel that like maybe like a talent acquisition person versus like a generalist, are those different people in your opinion? Yeah.
Totally different people. Yeah. Talent acquisition, think of it like a salesperson.
Yeah.
No different. Yeah.
Yeah. I call us like the tap dancers, like the Shooter McGavins.
You're
like
selling the company, you're marketing it, you're branding it, you're looking for those perfect candidates, you're bringing them across the line, you're selling them on it. They're 100%. We've at Clue, we actually just moved someone over from the sales team onto recruitment because it's the same DNA, it's the same competencies and attributes. And so, totally different people.
Well, like really going back to HR being that like heart of the business, I feel like the talent acquisition side very much, it's a great analogy of sales where, on the talent acquisition side, we get faced with so much rejection and, especially from the internal side where you've gone and recruited and found a great candidate and then you sub them up the ladder and then they get rejected. You don't necessarily know why. Again, maybe it's depending on the company, how deep entrenched you are in those conversations, but yeah, it's definitely a different role and one I think is really important for businesses that I think they really, when they do add that first HR person, really need to understand like what is the big issue. And I mean, I know it's tough. It's obviously business to business, but if a company was at that stage, maybe they're not hyper growth where they're trying to go from 50 to 200, but where they're a growing company, they see opportunity in the market, they're growing, they're selling. Um, is there a way you would think to help a company determine whether they just need a talent acquisition person or whether they need more of that generalist? Obviously, maybe the company's already got talent acquisition as a part of what they're doing. Would you maybe say that kind of bringing in that HR person to help with culture, to help with vision and mission alignment, make sure it's that top down? Do you think that's maybe probably a more important place to start, and then go talent acquisition once you've got that dialed in?
Yeah, especially if you think of small companies that are growing and they've got aggressive growth plans. I don't know if this is a good succinct way to put it, but I think a company should know when they're ready for HR, which does, focus on, how to scale a company through engagement, through inspiration, getting employees functioning at 110%. Finding their potential. It's when the CEO can't do that anymore, because usually that's where it starts, right? It's the CEO. They are the culture, the heart of the culture. And when it comes to a point in time where they need to go and maybe specialize in go-to-market strategy or product development, that's the time you got to now bring in that seasoned HR people pro.
Yeah.
And then the rest will come. Let that person build the team out as they see fit. But it's taking that off of the CEO's plate, letting the CEO focus probably on other areas where they're good at, and then let this head of people then, take what they built and then continue it, and continuing the culture and the engagement and all that good stuff. So I think that's a good way to look at it. It's going to free up that CEO to go do other important things.
Yeah, well, without even knowing the question I was going to ask, you answered it, which is, I'm sure when a company gets to that stage, the challenge is justifying that cost. How do we bring the person in? And of course, if you need to bring the right person in, you're not talking about, a freshie. You need someone who's, knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think the answer to the question is, if you can free the CEO up, who no longer has the time to do it, to focus on greater revenue generating activities, refining operations, that's where the money is going to come from. And then it might not be money in the pocket today, but that it's money that the business should be able to generate as it continues to grow and scale. So yeah, that's a perfect tie-in. That's awesome. I know we've kind of touched on this, but I think it's still worth cracking into more. You talked about who's in charge of culture. And I thought there was a couple of really good points we talked about in some of our previous conversations. So you mentioned that it's not just the CEO, but that it's a really important part, that it kind of lives top down. But yeah, who's in charge of culture?
Every single employee.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to stop it there. Every single employee is in charge of culture. Yeah.
How do you make sure that every employee knows that every employee is in charge of culture?
You gotta reinforce it. You gotta communicate it, that's an expectation, that, the code handbook that I talked about, that's how you set the tone right from before they've even walked in the door. And then you just have to, the leaders need to reinforce it and, hey, I saw you, witness someone, did something that wasn't quite right. You should have, maybe called them on that. Or so it's, team effort. But, I think if they can witness others and how they show up and are reinforcing the culture, everyone will get it and take heart. And if the CEO can really reiterate how important it is to them, the employees are going to take it to heart too. This is their company too, right? And so you have the power to make your time at this organization amazing. So go for it. Why wouldn't you? Yeah.
And you mentioned that was something you felt was real at both Galvanize and at Clue. Our last point that we had discussed was how, and I know we've touched on this, but I'm sure there's some other little tidbits in there about how you were brought into Galvanize, as you mentioned, when they had a negative net promoter score, they were lacking the culture, had high turnover, had low engagement. A new CEO is brought in, they overhaul the executive team, they bring you in, and 5 years later, you've received, or the company's received, tons of awards, that unicorn $1 billion exit, and a 3,000% increase to the business valuation. I guess anything else that I guess you can share in terms of how that, I guess all the stuff we talked about, HR being at the table, the values, how it was a part of everybody, I guess, how did you guys make it real? It's great to say like it's an important piece, but yeah, I guess if you were to give that advice, maybe this is again ties into that kind of parting question for us, is if there was that one thing that someone can take away from the discussion today, or that specific action item that you would say, do this, like take this and go do it right now with your company. Yeah, what would you say? How do you help someone do what
that's a big question, but
yeah,
a true, people leader pro can really help the CEO put their vision of great culture into practice and reinforce it. And so through programs, whether it be, the recruitment processes to engagement programs to performance, career development, like there's so many different programs that a strong HR person will bring to the table that will reinforce that great culture, that will help build on it, that will that alone, I think is probably the biggest thing that they can do. And so that's how important it is. And that will lead to, engaged employees who are going to work harder, who are going to innovate more. Yeah.
nice.
So hopefully that answers.
No, that's fantastic. I think if I had one takeaway to share with people, it would be that your job posting probably sucks, and that you need a success profile. And I'm super excited to have another chat with you and really dig into that and share with what companies need to do to really, once you have all these other pieces in place, what you need to do to really attract some great talent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kathy, it's been fantastic connecting with you.
Great.
Well, of course, if you're open to it, we'll share your LinkedIn profile below. And if people have questions and want to reach out and connect with you, we'll encourage them to do it. Again, I really appreciate you helping share some of your knowledge, and hope that if anybody takes even a small piece of this away, that it'll positively affect, people working in their companies who maybe don't realize that culture is just as much their role as anyone else's. And if some businesses take some info away from this and really make sure the culture is real and not just a plaque on the wall, then I think we've done our job.
It will take companies far if they really value, the happiness of their employees. Companies will go far. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us on HR Doctors. All right.